Alright, today we'll be learning about the laws of exponents. So first, let's begin by reviewing the definition of an exponent. So if we have x to the first is x squared is x times x, and as we go along, we have the general idea that x to the y is x times x, and so on, where we have y-x's. So this is the definition of an exponent, and note that we can write this as times 1. That doesn't change anything. So we also have the law that x to the 0th is when we have 0 x's, so x to the 0th always equals 1. The next rule we have is the product rule. Okay, the product rule works like this. If we have x to the mth times x to the nth, note that the x's here have to be the same. Then we have is x times for mx's times x times all the way to x for nx's, which is of course just m plus n x's. Therefore, this is equal to x to the m plus n. This law is the product rule. And similarly, we also have the quotient rule, where x to the mth over x to the nth equals x to the m minus n. Exponentiation is also distributive over multiplication. What that means is, if we have xy to the nth power, if we take a look at this, we have this is equal to xy times xy for n xy's. And we can split this into two terms, x times x for n x's and n y's, which is, of course, just x to the nth times y to the n. And similarly, we can also say that x over y to the nth is equal to x to the nth over y to the nth. Now we have the power rule. The power rule states that if you have x to the nth power, well, you can write this as x to the nth times x to the nth for n terms, which by the product rule must equal x to the mnth. So this is the power rule. Next, we have the definition of negative exponents. This is just a definition, and we say that x to the negative nth equals 1 over x to the nth. And we also have a definition for fractional exponents, where we say that x to the 1 over nth is equal to the nth root of x. Let's just go over the laws one more time. We have that, of course, x to the first is x, and x to the 0th is 1. We then have the product rule, x to the mth times x to the nth is equal to x to the m plus nth. And the quotient rule, which states that x to the m divided by x to the nth is x to the m minus n. Then distributive rule, xy to the nth is equal to x to the nth times y to the nth. The quotient rule, which states x divided by y to the nth is equal to x to the nth over y to the nth. The power rule, which states x to the mth to the nth equals x to the mnth. The definition of a negative exponent, x to the negative nth equals 1 over x to the nth. A fractional exponent, where x to the 1 over nth is equal to the nth root of x. And these are the basic laws of exponents. Right. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.